The common theme of all of these women is a belief that there's something more out for them. And there's a lot of fear. I've spoken, each and every one of these women I've spoken to has communicated that they've had some level of fear. But what they wanted was greater than how terrified they were of what they wanted.
Disinformation is spreading.
There will be a
We only have
surprise
so many
outbreak.
beds.
Is the issue of pandemic?
No social distancing at all.
They said that they would express their concerns about the mask supply.
Where's the mask? Where's the gloves?
A second wave is
We all need some good news.
A message for all the healthcare workers out there.
Thank you.
If you're looking for hope tonight, raise your hand. If you feel alone and don't understand, if you're fighting the fight of your life, then stand.
From Santa Rosa, California, this is 19 Stories. I'm Cheryl Halling. I hope you're all having a wonderful start to 2024 and that you have some things you're feeling really excited about. If not, perhaps my next guest will inspire you, as she is the founder, host, and chief inspiration officer of the Women in the Arena podcast, a celebration of everyday women living extraordinary lives in plain sight. Now in its fourth year, the Women in the Arena podcast seeks to inspire, encourage, and challenge women to reach for the greatness they were made for. And I invite the men to stick around, as I imagine we could all use that kind of encouragement. As a corporate veteran and an award-winning sales professional, Audra A-gin has 24 years' experience of being one of the few women in the room, and in many cases, the only one. While the women she worked with may have been outnumbered, she recognized that they were all uniquely exceptional and became fascinated in learning more about them and their experiences. It became increasingly clear that these women were contributing significant value to their organizations, families, and careers, and that their contributions were either being taken for granted or overlooked, sometimes even by themselves. Audra had aspirations to change that, and as a result, Women in the Arena was created. As the creator, producer, and host, Audra says it's a platform unlike any other. It's a celebration. She believes that if we start to recognize the value within ourselves, then we can start to acknowledge the value within each other and see that we have more similarities than what appears on the surface. It is that knowledge that begins to change the narrative from "you are my competition" to "you are my best asset." This is life-changing and, as a result, world-changing. This is Audra's goal, to change the world one interview at a time. So let's meet this world changer by welcoming Audra A-gin to 19 Stories.
Wow, thank you, Cheryl. I've never been introduced like that. I even want to meet this person. Who is she?
Well, she is the wonderful person on the other side of the microphone. So thank you, Audra, for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm really good. It's a rainy day here in Arizona, which is rare, but we celebrate the rain because we don't get it very often.
Yeah, your counter to that is the 110, 120 degree heat that you had for what, a month long this past summer?
It was misery. It was a brutal punishment unlike I have ever experienced, and I am a native. And we've never had anything to that extent for that long in my recent and distant memory.
Well, that's saying a lot. Yeah, I think the weather patterns everywhere. It's a cold and rainy day here as well. And we do get rain. We expect it this time of season. And yet it has been, and I dare not complain because I think of what's going on in the Pacific Northwest and the rest of the country. But it has been more of a very gray, cold winter for us in Sonoma County. But I'm excited to have you here with me today, as you and I have similar aspirations with our respective podcasts. And I'm looking forward to chatting with you about that.
It's a rare treat to be able to be on this side of the mic, so I appreciate you inviting me.
Well, I hope I do you justice, and you are more than welcome. And before we talk about your Women in the Arena, let's talk a bit about your extensive experience in business and explore how that led you to form Women in the Arena.
Well, I am in a very competitive industry, and it is male-dominated. It always has been. I entered this industry right out of college because I didn't know what else to do, quite frankly. And I am in this mortgage lending industry. I work on the provider side, and it is a different world. In that role, because of me being in a sales executive position, I'm usually outnumbered. There's usually not a whole lot of women in the room. There's a lot of women in operations, but in the rooms that I need to negotiate in, I'm typically either one of two or the only one. And that worked for a while for me because I didn't know the difference, because everywhere I looked, it was same for them. So until a couple of years ago, I just accepted it as this is norm. This is how it's going to be. And I accepted it until I couldn't anymore. If you want to know the truth, my podcast was started out of anger and frustration. This became a rebellion for me. So Women in the Arena is technically a rebellion.
You know what? As they say, necessity is the mother of invention.
Correct.
With that outlet, it sounds like.
Yes. And it started because I got really angry one particular moment. And it could have been any moment. I think it was just a moment that finally there was so much compounded on top of it that my brain just clicked and went, enough. And it was because my value was being dismissed in multiple rooms and areas because it didn't look like my male counterparts. So when I sat in that anger for a minute, and in a rare moment of clarity when I'm mad, which doesn't always happen, I suddenly took a step back and a deep breath and realized all of the women around me were brilliant in any role, in every role that they occupied. They are brilliant. But then I also realized that they were experiencing the same exact thing that I was. They were being overlooked, dismissed, taken for granted. And because we'd become so conditioned to this, we accepted it as
Accepted it.
okay.
Yes. 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 And I'm curious if I may jump in and ask, were you having dialogue or conversations with your female counterparts, or were you all kind of, this sounds dramatic, but suffering in silence?
We were all suffering in
In
silence.
silence. Yeah.
We just didn't acknowledge it. We thought if we don't talk about it, it won't matter. And I finally stopped not talking about it and started asking questions about, and it really wasn't about their jobs. I started asking questions about, tell me about you.
Yeah.
Tell me, what do you do? What do you do outside these four walls? What do you do outside your particular role that you utilize to take care of your family? And I found out that these women were just insanely accomplished. And it started with a friend of mine. She is a grandmother of two. She celebrated her 60th year last year, and she was a salesperson just like I am. And on the outside of the business walls, she was a gold winning water skier.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
She was in the, wasn't in the Olympics. It's now becomes club when you get to a certain age, but it is a global organization, and it's amateur skiing in her age division, and she has multiple gold medals.
That's
Multiple. Like
amazing.
she's ranked 5 in the world. And I went, "What? This is your real life?" And she's like, "Well, yeah." And I said, "Why don't we all know about it? Why aren't we all like oohing and eyeing over your gold medals?" And she's like, "I don't know." Well, okay, well, everybody's gonna know. And
You know, yeah,
I
I just gotta jump in and say, you know what I love? I celebrate that you were curious enough to ask that, because I think it's getting better. I think women are really starting to celebrate one another. But do you find there's women who are also threatened by the fact that you and other women have a life outside of what they're looked at or viewed at their jobs?
at one point I would have said yes, but I think that that's a misunderstanding. I think that's a lack of communication and allowing each other space to get to know one another. I really
Mm.
don't think that that's a jealousy or intimidation or anything. It's a separation that it has been designed to keep us separate and suspicious of one another.
Ah. I know a lot of our corporate settings are working towards more diversity and being inclusive of women and ethnicities, et cetera. Do you feel that with that, more women are having a seat at the table? And if not, why not?
That is that is a complicated answer to a complicated question.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure.
Do I think that there are more women that have seats at the table? Yes. But I am seeing a different trend where women are examining, is this the table I want to belong to?
Ah, ooh, that's good. That's so good. That's so good. Yeah. It goes along with your motto, which I love so much about women in the arena and then why you were inspired to launch your podcast, that women's contributions are either being taken for granted or overlooked, sometimes even by themselves. And you mentioned about women being brilliant and the woman who is a gold medal winner. I imagine, when you're really smart, successful, and creative, which a lot of the women I know, maybe that's the time like you got angry, but it caused you, instead of being bitter, you got better and you said, what can I do about this? So do you think it's getting better with women saying, I can change this narrative by changing my choices in what I participate in?
Yes, I think that the pandemic had a lot to do with that. And certainly me being able to take a broader look at my situation, the pandemic contributed to it because I had no choice but to slow down. I was trapped in my house
Yeah.
along with everybody else. And that gave us downtime to re-examine what we were doing and why we were doing it, and was it worth it or was it not? And that gave women a lot of opportunity to go, well, wait a minute, maybe this isn't what I want to do. Maybe I've worked so hard to belong to this club and I realize this isn't the club for me. And I think that that's okay. I actually think that that's a wonderful achievement and evolution. I also think that women also need to still be working in corporate spaces, because that framework is never going to change unless there are some women that are willing to gut it out and change it.
That is so interesting because I think that applies to every sector of our society. Where I live in Sonoma County, there's certain things that my husband and I would like to see. He's from here. I've lived up here off and on for many, many years, traveling to other places, living other places. And there's certain things that we want to see in our life and be part of. And we've been having this conversation. Do we leave a place where it doesn't have what we're looking for? Or do we take it upon ourselves to contribute and create the things that we want to see? Because as you just said, if all the women leave corporate settings, how is it ever going to change? How are their voices going to be understood and heard? And I'll venture to say, for the men that are still with us, that there's men out there feeling the same thing. The corporate job that I recently left, I had a conversation with a man who did just that. He realized he didn't want to be part of that particular team anymore. He had other desires for his family and for himself, and realized that where he was at, it wasn't going to be possible. So he had to move on and make a different choice so he could have that in his life as well. That's a really, really good point for us to examine what, so many times I have felt like I'm the towel or water girl, if you will. And I could tell by your laugh that you totally understand that.
I understand that reference.
Yeah, like you're around all these key players, but never fully actualize your place on the court or in the arena. So the visual of having a full arena of women is such a strong metaphor for inclusion in all aspects of life. But one of the nuggets you just gave is so powerful. It's like, do I even want to be part of what I'm asking for or being excluded from? Wow, that is so strong. So I'm curious, from the women that you interview, because they're all across the board. They're so dynamic. I mean, the couple of episodes I've listened to have been a doctor in holistic healthcare, if you will. And you and I have spoken about that when we had an initial chat. And then you have someone who's approaching living spaces to look at what we've put in our living spaces. What can we take out to allow room to bring in the things that we want and have a more holistic living space? So are there through lines that you're getting from all the women that you've interviewed about how they were able to get to where they're at and what different choices did they make in order to do so?
The common theme of all of these women is a belief that there's something more out for them. And there's a lot of fear. I've spoken each and every one of these women I've spoken to has communicated that they've had some level of fear. But what they wanted was greater than how terrified they were of what they wanted.
Yes.
So that's the common thread. They are no different than you and I. They just they felt the same fears, they feel the same insecurities. And these are some of the women that I have interviewed expressed to me their level of insecurities. And this particular woman works with the president. So if she, at
Mm.
her level, if she's feeling those feelings of I'm not good enough, this is too much for me, are they going to take me seriously? All those things that run through each and every one of our heads that we think we're normal and not the normal people do. I'm here to tell you that they all feel this, regardless of their education, their accomplishments, their level in life. They all feel the same thing. That is what I have found is common. As women, we are all feeling very similar things. We're just not talking to each other about it because we've been given this impression that we're supposed to project that we've got it all going together or all going on all at the same time. And we don't. I heard this phrase of work like you have no children, but parent like you have no job. That's that's what we're all
Whoa.
pretending to be.
Did you read that or someone actually said that to you?
That I read that. I cannot tell you the source, but I read it and it took my breath away because that had been my existence, and it's every woman's existence, whether they have children or not. They're expected to put on this mask and pretend they've got it all going on. And if they talk to other women and let that fall, then they would find out that no, I don't have it all together. And what will they think of me? Will they think that I'm not good enough? Will they think I'm less than? Well, you're already dealing with all those thoughts in your head. And if
Mhm.
you go and speak it out loud to someone else, well, then they must be true. That's what is taking place. And I'm trying to dispel all those myths and go, no, 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 no. Drop all of that because we are way more connected than you think. I actually spoke with a woman last week and she said something so profound to me that it has haunted me for an entire week. And because I keep thinking about it, she made this statement and she said, Audra, you and I may not like each other. And actually, we like each other very well. She was just using this as an example. She says,
Sure.
um, we may not like each other, but I'll be damned if I let your children starve.
Wow. Okay. That is so powerful because that addresses a lot of what's going on in our culture right now
Mm-hmm.
on so many levels of being able to see the humanity in each other as opposed to just dismissing someone because we don't like them or don't understand them. And I think that seeing one another through the eyes of empathy and compassion, like you said, that we're more interconnected than we think. And that's across every level.
Yes.
And Audra, it's clear that with all of your work experience that you've been very successful in your chosen field. And you just talked about fear. And of course, fear being fear to hope being the through line of this podcast of wanting to move away from that fear. Because when we're stuck in it, it is debilitating. It's feeding tapes in our head over and over and over again about lies either from our childhood or society or bad experiences. And I imagine you've had your fair share of fear in being overlooked for your contributions or other matters, other reasons. And I read in one of your social posts that I always encourage my teams to be brave enough to make mistakes. If you are making mistakes, that means you are growing beyond your comfort zone. And that's where real growth happens. Would you also say that acknowledging one's own contributions or asking to be seen is a pretty fearful thing because you're stepping out of your comfort zone, and that's a really difficult thing to do?
Oh, it's terrifying. And I will share with you something that I did personally because I couldn't sit with the feeling of not being seen as important on my own team. I have an amazing boss who's open and wants to hear feedback. And my feedback to him was, let me speak. That's all. Hear me.
Mm.
In a group, in a setting, hear me. I can't compete with all of the male voices. They're all louder and stronger than mine are. I can't change my voice, but I'm asking for space. And he was absolutely willing and able to do that. He didn't realize that's part of this. That's part of why I'm getting women and men to be brave enough to speak to one another and communicate, because you'd be surprised on what you're going to find on the other side. I was met with compassion and understanding, and absolutely I didn't know. I didn't know because we're not talking to each other. Of course we don't know. But I was brave enough to make this expression of this is what I need. And he was gracious enough to acknowledge that he didn't realize that I needed it and would do everything he could to make sure that that space was made. All from one simple conversation. That was terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. He's my boss. But I was honest with him, and I chose my words to communicate with compassion for him too, because I realized that he had not heard this before.
That's saying a mouthful right there. That is saying a lot of having the acknowledgement that he's got new information. So to be gracious with him and compassionate with him, because he may not have known how to react, but the fact that he reacted that way to you is a really beautiful thing, because that's not always the case. And maybe that's where some of the fear comes from for both women in particular. That's who we're talking about, women in the arena, but from the men out there as well, to manage our expectations when we are asking for what we want, because there are going to be people who are receptive to it and absolutely be compassionate and empathetic. And there's going to be people that they're just going to toe the line no matter what, because that's all they know. I guess this goes along with another question I had for you. What pearls of wisdom or skill set have you learned so that women can enter into the arena or a seat at the table or fill in the blank with confidence?
First of all, I should tell you that from all these women that I've interviewed, because of the structure of the interview, they all share a very special place of themselves with me. It's vulnerable and it's authentic, and so they're spending that time with me, and so they're giving a little piece of themselves to me and to the audience. So I have been changed by each and every one of them in
Mm.
some way, somehow. There's no way that you can do what I've done and not be changed. What I have learned is to, first of all, not to be so judgmental and guess what people are projecting.
Yes.
Because if they're projecting something, I guarantee you it probably has maybe 10% to do with you and 90% to do with everything else. You don't know what's going on in their lives. So don't be so judgmental. And if people respond to you in an aggressive way, also probably not about you either. That doesn't mean that they're not deserving of compassion and grace. Everybody's going through something. So, in that scenario, as you had discussed about what if you communicated your authentic self and it wasn't responded to in such a positive manner? I go back to the statement of they've probably never heard it. So, how would they know how to respond? And they might take it back and go and think about it. That's what I'm trying to encourage and communicate, is that leave each other room, invite people in, give them compassion, drop the judgment against each other, because we're all dealing with something. And lastly, one of the things that one of my guests shared with me is that in her generation, because she's probably about 20 years younger than I am, her generation, they want to make sure that they leave space and reach behind them and pull the next woman up with them. That's what I want to do as well. Like you had said in my intro, leave room for each and every one of us and recognize each other for our unique gifts, and that we really are at the core wanting very much the same things. Why not help each other get there to do it?
I love what you just said about reaching back and pulling other women with you, and because we're all standing on the shoulders of the work that other women and I will say men as well. We all gain from the work that other people have done. And wow, when we have empathy and compassion for one another through the eyes of what the lens of what you just said, it does change so much in our personal relationships. And I will say from my personal experience that we also need to allow ourselves grace when we don't act in that way. Whatever has been going on in our own lives, that maybe we've blown it. Maybe our sole purpose of the day is let's get through the day loving on people and serving one another. And at the end of the day, you go, wow, I totally stunk up the room. Right? And if we're allowing other people grace, it goes back to what you said of not acknowledging our strengths and not acknowledging our contributions. Well, there are days that we don't acknowledge that in others. And so we have to allow ourselves grace and go, okay, tomorrow I'll have a new fresh 24 hours, or, even this hour or this half hour or these few minutes in this meeting. My goal is to reach into my strength and do it better and be a better shining example, because that's what we need to see in our world right now, is more light and more people willing to dig deep and be empathetic and compassionate and understanding to one another. So I wasn't going to ask you this, but I read this yesterday in going through some more of your materials, in that you had an attack of appendicitis. Was about 6 months ago.
I did.
And, I bring that up because, we have a well-known late night television personality, Stephen Colbert, who just went through that as well. And I think sometimes when we go through, especially physical things that take us out of commission, that whether they're stress induced, whether they're diet, from my understanding, no one really understands why that happens. But when you were going through that, was there anything with the work that you are doing, either professionally or moving towards building this arena for women to enter into, that you had an epiphany about?
Yeah, actually. And this happened on a Monday, and I drove myself. I don't recommend that. Don't Men, women, if you have appendicitis, ask somebody to drive you.
You drove yourself to the hospital?
I did.
Oh my God.
I did. 'Cause
Oh my
I
gosh.
know, I absolutely did. My husband had already left for work. He was on the other side of the city. It would have taken him at that hour, an hour and a half to get there. And I was like, I'll just drive myself. I don't recommend that.
There are things called ambulances, I'm just going to say.
You know what? That never dawned on me.
Okay. Because you're a strong woman who's used to taking care and being in leadership. I get it.
Yes, it never occurred to me. I was like, okay, there's no one here to take me. I'll just take myself. Like I said, I don't recommend it. However, in the middle of all that, and on the other side of the morphine, which I also don't recommend because that's not fun either, I suddenly had a couple of thoughts. My first thought was, wow, work is going on without me, and like the world is still spinning, and I'm here in a hospital bed waiting for surgery, and nothing has changed. My job is still rolling on. So that was the first thing that I was like, huh, they could do this with me or without me. But the second thing that I also acknowledged also about my job is that my colleagues and my boss, my wonderful boss that I spoke about earlier, they were worried about me. They didn't care if I had projects going on that they weren't going to be done or whatnot. They also acknowledged that the world's still spinning, that still needs to be going on, but they weren't worried about that. They were worried about me, which means that they've done a good job and I've done a good job of creating that safe communication and recognizing each other as people rather than just employees.
Yeah.
And for both of those epiphanies, I was grateful.
Those are moments that give clarity. And the fact that you had such a positive epiphany and the clarity was a good thing as opposed to, wow, I'm just a cog in the wheel. And you had a family. You had a family of workers. And that's reflective of you too, Audra. That means what you've poured into people, what you've been talking about this entire time. You obviously have created a team that fostered that for one another, because it could have been a different thing. It could have been like, sorry to hear about this, but we need you back at work. And you had the other, and that must have been such a beautiful thing to help you heal and gain your strength so you can go back and be part of the team again.
And they gave me so much space. They said, "How are you feeling? If you get too tired during the day, go lay down. We'll take care of this. None of this really matters. All that matters is that you get better." I'm like, "Yeah, okay." And they were very supportive, and they've been supportive amongst other things as well. And I think part of it is when I joined this team, I made a commitment to myself as well as to the team that I was no longer going to send my representative. I was no longer going to present myself as whom I thought they needed me to be, because that's quite frankly exhausting. You can't do that forever. At least I can't. But I was going to show up as me, authentic, transparent, weaknesses, strengths, vulnerabilities, all of it. And I just hoped for the best to see what would happen. And this has been the result.
That's the best we can do, Audra, because if we, and I know a lot of women who are getting it in their later years of, let me turn this phrase into a positive. If we're going to be accepted, it's going to be because we are being real and showing up authentically. Because if you're going to be rejected for being someone else, how are you ever going to know how much more showing up as you in all your glory would have been accepted if you made the other choice? So I love that you did make that choice. And I'm curious what brings you joy personally and professionally.
Wow. That's a long list, honestly.
That's good.
I'm
Yay.
I'm very blessed. What brings me joy is my family, my husband, my kids, spending time with my friends. Oh, my friends are amazing. I have an incredible community of friends that just we surround each other in love. That gives me joy. Learning something new gives me joy. I have a long list of hobbies that are all in some sort of creative space, because I have recognized that I have this need to create. I am at my happiest. I am at my most calm when I am creating something. And I've just leaned into it. And as I get older, that there's something that I need to do to create, and that must fill my soul. So I'm just going to lean into that.
To which I will say amen. And, I see it getting better. I actually heard an interview last night on PBS. They end their news with always a positive note and on something creative. And I am completely having a brain fart. I'll get to her name. I'll figure it out before we say goodbye. And the actress was talking about her role where she played a swimmer who is a very well-known swimmer. And of course, I'm forgetting her name as well. This is the joys of getting older. I'm just going to put it out there. And I'm sure as any of the older women who are dealing with brain fog and all the stuff that goes along with hormones, which you've talked about this on one of your podcasts as
Oh,
well.
I have.
It is the most. Annette Bening, thank you very much. Annette Bening was talking about the role that she recently played, the swimmer Naiad, who swam from Cuba to Key West, and how the interviewer asked her, well, how come we've never heard these stories? And she said, because no one has ever covered them. They're out there. They're all around. There's been amazing creative. It ties back to what you just said about being creative and just feeling your most joy and alive. And I feel the same thing, just even talking with you right here, right now, and doing my podcast, as I'm sure you feel with yours, is that you are creating content that is exciting because you're hearing women's stories that haven't been brought to the fore until, dare I say, women like you and me, who've been interested enough, or the interviewer last night, interested enough to find out about these women and their stories in their older years. I'm curious, what makes you hopeful?
The younger generation makes me hopeful.
Mm,
And I say that I am 52. I am firmly in the middle of Gen X, proud Gen Xer. We are who we are. But I was thinking about this last night. We didn't have a blueprint. Our mothers and our grandmothers didn't know how to prepare us
right,
for what we
right.
were about to embark on. They had no clue how to teach us what we were going to go do. And we just figured it out as we went along. And we've made a ton of mistakes. Oh, we've made a ton of
I
mistakes.
I've got not only my hands raised, but my feet going, "Yep, mhm."
Oh, we have blown it big in many scenarios, many spaces. And but we're still here on this side. And look at the young women we have raised. The young women that Gen X has raised are millennials and Gen Zs. Look at them. They are incredible. They are fearless. They have developed a sense of self way earlier than we ever did.
Oh, yes, yeah.
My 23-year-old daughter knows exactly who she is, and she doesn't care what you think of her at all. Not She doesn't care what I think about her, her dad thinks about her husband thinks about her. She knows exactly who she is. She knows what she's worth. She knows what she wants, and she's going to figure out a way to do it. And she's not going to compromise the things that she feels are important in her life. And she's going to do it. That was not something that was taught to me or you, but we were able to instill that in our children because let's face it, what we were being uh, faced with and influenced by is the old perfume commercial about, the 8-hour perfume for the 24-hour woman. It can bring home the bacon kind of thing.
Fry it up in a pan, it'll
Yes.
never let you forget you're a man.
Yes.
Mhm.
So for those that have no idea what I'm talking about, let me set the stage for you. This was a commercial that came out in 1978, 79. So I was like around 7, 8 years old. This was a commercial that was played in the middle of soap operas. So in my case, I was at my grandmother's house. She was watching her stories. This commercial would come up. And it's this commercial that has these lyrics that is set to this really jazzy kind of tune. So you remember it. And I mean, Cheryl was just singing it to you, and this hasn't been on the air for 40 years. So it's ingrained in us. The story is the woman gets up in the morning. She gets her kids ready for school. She gets herself ready for work. She takes her kids to school. She works all day. She picks up the kids. She gets them ready for bed. She makes dinner. And then at the end, she's never going to let you feel like a man, wink, or never let you forget that you're a
Forget
man.
you're a man, yeah.
Wink, wink,
Mhm.
wink. That was the influence that we had.
And the expectation that and pressure that put on women. I love that you so beautifully illustrated the insanity of that because, Audra, I think back on my mom who was raising 3 kids on her own and working full time and trying to keep her creative, beautiful voice alive in the opera productions that she did. But yet she'd get up in the morning. And I think of this sometimes when I get into my, I don't have time for this. I think of my mom getting up. She would set the table. She'd fold the napkins. She would quarter our grapefruit, for goodness sake, right?
Wow.
And get us to school and go work full time. I mean, she ended up talk about being vulnerable. She ended up having a nervous breakdown, and no wonder why. Being the perfect woman, the
Yeah.
perfect mother, the perfect worker. I think of my niece when you were talking about your daughter. My niece is the same way. She is solid in who she is. She's so aware of societal topics, speaks about them very intelligently, does a lot of research if she doesn't know of something, because she also wants to be a world changer. Let's talk about women in the arena moving forward. You're in your 4th year of producing your podcast.
I am. It's
Hallelujah,
yeah.
hallelujah. I wish I had boop, 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 blasts and sounds and hallelujahs going off, because anybody who knows what it's like to produce a podcast or produce content or anything, And especially when you're doing it on your own, it's a feat to be in your fourth year. And you've interviewed very diverse and really intriguing women. And I'm curious what your vision is for women in the arena as we move into 2024.
Oh, I have big fat dreams. And if you don't dream big, why even dream in the first place? That's what dreams are for. Dream big.
Yep.
I want to build this arena. I somehow want to make it possible for women. I want to create a connection site for women to be able to connect with one another, connect with my guests. My guests have all said, yes, you have any questions, you want to talk to me, reach out to me. I want to make it easier for them to do that. I want to create that. I would love to make some in-person recordings and walk through a day in the life of one of my guests. I'd love to be able to do that. I want to be able to do in-person events that are meaningful. For those of you that have ever gone to an event and you've been there all day and at the end of it, you're like, I want my time and my money back. That's not what I want to create.
Well, I would hope not.
That's not what I want to create. I want to create these in-person events that are these women that will inspire you to go out and do and be whatever it is that you were put on this planet to be. But more importantly, make them accessible to you. Because there's a lot of things that you can do on this planet or that you can emulate, but you're separate from them. You can't relate to them. You can admire them from afar, but you can't relate to them. I want to create something different. I want to make something relatable. So this actually makes impact for you. And then who knows? I'd like to start doing some actual public speaking and get paid for it, because why not? Why not get paid for it? Why not get paid for what you're worth and what you're talented at doing? Go ahead and do it. So I have big, fat dreams that I'm putting the foundation into place right now. I have no idea how I'm going to accomplish all of them. I don't need to know all that. I just need to know the first 2 steps in front of me, and that's what I'm doing. I'm following the breadcrumbs.
Amen. There's a great book. The title is Just Enough Light for the Step I'm On. And so many times we get boggled down by how are we going to make this happen because we look so future, as opposed to going, you know what, I'm standing on this step. I'm going to take it, and then I'm going to take the next one and the next one and the next one. And there's so many metaphors and so many things that we could say in regards to that. But you, my dear Audra, are just a light in my step and part of what I'm doing here. And I am so very grateful that you joined me. And I have one final question before we say goodbye. If there was a soundtrack to your life, what would be on it and why?
Well, the first song would be Old Soul by Highwomen. If you've never heard it, go listen to the words, because I think that it describes every single woman I know. It basically, part of the phrase is, if I was a wild child for a day, I would set them all up just to break them. But that's not your reality. You're still going to be an old soul. I'll throw you a party and I'll stay home to clean it up for you. It's a beautiful song, and I think it describes every single woman I know. And then the rest of the songs would be some sort of song I can dance to. I don't care what.
Okay. Yes. I had a guest who said something about dancing. It was in particular the Whitney Houston song, I Want to Dance with Somebody, which I think is just such a joyous song. So I'll join you in that. And I'm going to go listen to the song you shared. And I love the description of it. Audra, thank you for stepping into my arena today. I'm very honored that you did. And if I gave out jerseys, I'd certainly have one with your name on it. And I truly hope you continue effecting positive changes, one interview at a time.
Thank you, Cheryl. And thank you for having me here. It's been a joy and a privilege to be here with you.
You're welcome.
I'll be the first to toast and throw confetti, and break the champagne bottle with a sword. And when the party's over, I'll be ready to sweep the floor.
I'd also like to thank the following news outlets for the use of their clips: BBC, PBS, Now This, UNESCO, and Some Good News. I especially want to thank Joel and Luke Smallbone, otherwise known as the Group for King and Country, for allowing me to use an excerpt of their song Together, which could not be a more hopeful and inspiring song for such a time as this. Finally, I'll leave you with the following from Proverbs 23:18. Surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off. Thank you again for joining me today. Feel free to offer feedback or a story idea at 19stories@soundsatchelstudios.com. Visit my website at soundsatchelstudios.com, via Instagram at CherylHollingVO. I look forward to sharing more stories on the next episode of 19 Stories from Fear to Hope. Until then, stay healthy and hopeful.
Together with our differences, together we are bolder, braver, stronger.